Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Lumineers Quest podcast, where we talk everything Lorcana. I'm Zach.
And I'm Jacob.
Thanks for coming on this journey with us. Okay, today is our first go at the Chapter 5 meta report.
This one's a little wild because we don't have a specific source to use. We're kind of using a little bit of everything here.
A little bit of ink decks, a little bit of side events from the DLC in Toronto where Set 5 was legal. A little bit of local meta, a lot of online chatter.
Yep.
I mean, there's no central hub anymore to like really get this going. And so we'll probably do an updated one after the Vegas DLC because that'll be like the first really big tournament. Well, actually I say that, but as we're recording this weekend, there's a 10K in Atlanta.
Nice. Okay.
So maybe we should have put it off a week, but if you're,
going to Atlanta?
Well,
or this will come out after.
That.
You know what?
No, I think, I think it's just, this is a crazy time. Well, I mean, I'm getting into it like way too early, but there seems to be so much potential. I think we've said this before. We definitely didn't say it at the beginning of Set 4, but the gates seem to be wide open at this point.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little, Set 4 was really weird where it was like a lot of decks came around the get-go, but they were kind of quickly killed.
They were very quickly killed off by Bucky / Sisu on ice.
Yeah, and now without that restriction, they can kind of...
Yeah, and then, without the Bucky, you have to be able to draw a bunch of cards restriction. You're able to get a little bit more creative with your decks. But anyways, that's what we're talking. And if you're on YouTube / Spotify, you see that we're actually doing this in a more tier list version because those seem to be fun and everybody seems to really enjoy that. So we're going to do the normal meta report and talk about all the decks, but we're also going to kind of, talk about how they stack up against each other. So I guess with that said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So, yeah, as always, everyone, thanks for listening. If you're buying your singles for Set 5 and you want to support the channel, the best way to do so, if you want to support the podcast, the best way to do so is use our TCG Player affiliate link, which you can find in the description wherever you're listening. If you want to send us questions / comments, you can do so on our X / Twitter account at LorcanaPod or send us emails at lorcanapod@gmail.com. So yeah, you ready to jump into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
There has been a lot of chatter in the Lumineers Quest sphere of Mufasa.
All right, so let me hear it. Let's hear it.
Yep. So Molly emailed in and had some comments about Mufasa. I've seen comments on the YouTube page about Mufasa as well. And so I think, just talking and giving our updated thoughts on Mufasa now that we've had more time to test. Well, I don't know why this is going like this now, but I had the email pulled up to read off. There it goes. I don't know what the deal was. It was just a big black box. But yeah, Molly says, could be wrong, but she's going to say S tier. And I think she has a lot of the same opinions that I did on Mufasa is that, Tamatoa is still there, but if you don't have any items or dime to really make that pop off, then it can be a little lackluster late game. Mm-hmm. But obviously Mufasa can live by itself and you don't necessarily have to have the dime to get a ton of value from it. Totally agree with all those points. And so I'm still really hesitant. It's one of those really weird ones where he's an insanely busted card, but in the current meta, I don't really know how he fits in. So I'm kind of rethinking the tier list because I think he probably is A tier in the current meta and the current landscape of the game. Because, I think that Ward is just if we were to do an updated abilities tier list, which I don't know, we probably should do that actually too, because I don't think we've done that since Set 1.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's actually a good one to do. We could put a note on that one.
All right.
Ward is by far the end all be all. Think about Bucky, think about Prince John, think about Muses.
Cogs.
Yeah. And so my personal testing has pushed me more back towards Aerial Treasure Collector as that big final swing because of the Ward. So can't get tapped by Muses, can't get tapped by Medusa, basically have to be prepared. And so, yeah, I mean, you can't Elsa Fifth Spirit to exert it to then, finish it off or anything like that. So a little off track there, but Molly, I agree with you. I think in the, it's siloed box of the Mufasa card itself, it very well could be the best card in the game. The abilities / power level / health / all of the things that are considered when using that card. But you obviously have to like take in the broader landscape of like how the games are playing out and the speed of the game. I mean, I think the speed of set 5 is paced up so fast that it's a lot harder for something like that to get off. And so yeah, I think that he's still insane, but in a vacuum. And the current meta, I honestly I hate like backtracking, but I think probably is an A.
No, I mean, I think we'll talk about this later once we get into the tier list. But like, set 4 meta compared to this was really slow.
Very slow.
Very slow. Like games and how long it took you to start getting to where you wanted to be compared to this set. That they added a few cards that speed up the game.
Bunch of big swings. It was either a big dime swing or Green Steel had 7 cards on the board and they finally felt comfortable questing, and so they quested for 10 with all the characters they had on board. But yeah, so a lot of big swings last set. This set is very much quicker.
Set 4, every deck had an engine that needed to be started before they could get to questing,
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. And that's very much changed, which we'll obviously get into. So yeah, that's the conversations that I've been hearing a lot lately. And so yeah, I just wanted to give an updated thought on Mufasa because he's still one of my favorite cards, one of my favorite art of the set as well.
I don't think he's bad by any means.
No, he's definitely not bad.
He's not bad by any
means. If you want to throw him in there, throw him in there. Yeah. But it's just, a little slow.
No one's going to look at you weird. Like, it's Mufasa.
No, you definitely won't get a, what in the world are you thinking for including Mufasa in your deck? But anyways, okay. Next, moving on. Card of the week.
Card of the week. We've been doing really bad at keeping track of what we've already used.
Yeah, and I was going through my notes this week to think of stuff or to like making notes for this week's episode, and I saw that and I was like, yep, there are 0 cards in there because I erased everything like after I think the last time I was keeping notes was the end of set 3. In set 4 we just never did it again. But do you have one in mind that you would like to?
I don't think we've done Clarabelle.
Let's talk about Clarabelle because I mean we can do it very briefly too because she's obviously going to be a big part of the discussion here. But we're going to talk about like the shift lines and everything involved with Clarabelle. So Clarabelle is one of the legendary emeralds from Shimmering Skies. My brain is not working, and is maybe is she a better draw engine than Flaversham now? It's a little situational, but Flaversham is too because there's combo pieces involved. So I don't know. I mean, she's a lot more expensive. Anyways, Clarabelle is a 7-cost inkable in Emerald. Like I said, she has a 5/6 stat line, quests for 2, shift 5. So that's a big one, especially given the kind of hand dump that you want to do with her because her ability says at the end of your turn. So, not like at the start of your turn where your opponent has time to react to it, but at the end of your turn, if chosen opponent has more cards in their hand than you may draw cards until you have the same number. So this is very much in the realm of like kind of a whole new world on I'm just going to dump my hand and ink everything and then just get a bunch more cards back to be able to do stuff with all that ink that I just had. And so, yeah, she's a massive body with 5/6 as well. There's not a lot of stat lines that have that high of a strength and willpower. And so, yeah, the ability to draw 6 cards on one turn. I mean, need I say more?
I mean, and this is just me personally as a player, but like I want to have like for me specific, like I don't like necessarily like cards like Lady Tremaine and like the new Mother Gothel like that depend on your opponent that like necessarily, like this depends on what your opponent's drawing.
Yes, in some sense for sure, but you also, like I said, since you can dump your hand, like you kind of own, like you can go play a bunch of stuff, then play her, and then you're good again. So I hear what you're saying because there is, again, that's the dependency of Clarabelle is that if your opponent doesn't have any cards and you don't have any cards, then nobody has any cards.
She's inkable, so that helps.
Yeah, I agree, but again, there's a little bit of, kind of precursor to this popping off, just like Flaversham. You have to have found an item first. Can't get removed, which there's a ton of removal tools that will now do that to Flaversham. So I think they're both cracked. I think the biggest problem that comes with this one is that it obviously pairs best with Sapphire because you're trying to dump your hand, and the best way to do that is, inking a bunch of stuff with Sapphire. And there's not a ton of removal in those. And so I don't, I know a lot of people have talked about this deck, which that'll definitely come up as we talk about the tier list, but Yeah, I mean, if you're not familiar with Clarabelle, you definitely should be because she's, I think, going to be one of the best draw engines in the game. And I think we've said this every set too, where, you kind of are like iffy on a card to begin with, and then you realize that it has a draw ability. And I mean, is there a like bad card that has a draw ability like this?
Maleficent Legendary.
The Maleficent
The
Legendary.
Amethyst one. It's like a 2/3 at 5 cost.
But does it draw? I
Every
thought
time-
that was the
Every time it quests, right? It draws?
I thought that was the move damage one. I'm pulling it
Am I
up real
wrong?
quick.
I think it also does that, no?
During your turn, whenever you draw a card, you may move 1 damage.
Oh, okay.
That
All right.
one.
But does that have a secondary ability that draws?
When this character quests, you may draw a card.
Okay.
Okay, no, you're right. So, yeah, I mean I guess that is a weird one because, but so again, like we've been over it a million times that, and if it's not a non-play ability, then it suffers a lot, and so I guess that would be the why on that one.
Unless you're Diablo.
Yeah, I think the evasive, like if this Maleficent was
Sure.
evasive, then I think you're in that same camp.
Evasive ward.
Yeah. So, anyways, okay. So that's Clarabelle, which we will be talking a little bit more in depth as we get into the tier list. But
For sure.
Any news? What's on our mind? Quick match recap.
I mean, not necessarily. It's really, my mind at least has been trying to form an idea of the meta right now and like what's good again, the matchups and stuff like that. So it really just goes into our main
Testing.
conversation here.
Yeah, I mean testing. I think that we've talked a bunch of this set about like building proxy decks. And like just it's like, oh, I don't have a deck build. It's like, well, just build a proxy deck then. Like literally the whole thing. We were talking about that last week or this week or whenever it was for you and your brother to play against because. If you get in that same mindset of just like playing the same deck over and over and over and, the same matchup, you don't get a really good spread of it. And it's like, well, just play a bunch of different decks then and, get, a good understanding of how everything plays. But so that's really still what's on my mind is, Vegas for me is coming up and gosh, what is it? 3 weeks now. So yeah, I mean, we're running very close into the time frame where I want to be very confident and ready going into another challenge. Definitely don't feel like I'm there yet. I'm kind of settling into my normal realm of like play style / deck choices, but yeah, still not, very confident in any specific spot yet.
Well, I think for you, the challenges are a little different of a beast now. They're more practice in themselves. For you
everything is. I mean, yes, obviously we're still not in the game state where the Continentals are going to be. Those are going to be set 6. But nonetheless, like, I still want to get, high level practice and everything and feel confident and continuing to learn and evolve. And so, yeah, I mean, going to these challenges, I guess I should say I got Seattle tickets, so I'll be in Seattle as well. Luckily my initial plan was to not go to Seattle, but I found a flight for under $200,
Nice.
which I think for most people that are listening in the United States, at least, are going to say, wow, that's really cheap. And so had it not been for that, then I probably wouldn't have gone. But yeah, it ended up being super reasonable from that respect. So yeah, going to Seattle as well.
Do we know the sizes of Vegas and Seattle yet?
I don't.
Okay.
And I've wondered that too because Toronto was a 1,000 person event.
Yep.
It's they've like kind of gone back and forth.
It's like every other.
Yeah, and so I would imagine at least one of them's 2,000. Vegas seems very reasonable to be 2,000 just because they have a bunch of large convention spaces. But that being said, I obviously know that there's a ton of logistics behind the scenes that have to like really work for that to happen, regardless if they have the space or not. So I don't know. I don't know if they have announced that prior to any of them.
I don't. Yeah.
Aside from Atlanta, they said Atlanta we're increasing the cap,
Sure.
and we will do that where possible in the future ones. But I don't think they've ever like really actually gone in before those quote future ones that have now happened and said these ones will be.
Yeah.
Not, so.
I think you're right.
Okay. So anything else that to cover before we jump into it?
No, this is a pretty big episode. I think. I mean, we want to help because videos and episodes on this have been pretty sparse, like to my knowledge.
There's definitely been a few other big creators out there that have done it, but again, I think this is evolving so rapidly that of those might even be out of date now. I think a couple of the ones I've watched are still pretty relevant, and they have the thoughts behind them are obviously still relevant, but the minor tweaks of all these things that continuously happen, really take hold of the meta and really can, the smallest of tweaks can shift decks in the biggest of ways. And so, while the overall arching, thoughts behind the decks and like kind of the strategies are still there, the rankings and where everything really is might shift drastically. So with that said, yeah, I guess let's go ahead and start doing this. So
Let's do it.
If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, we have a video up here, and so we're going to kind of repeat what's going on at the end of a couple of these, so that the people listening can have a mental picture of where everything ends up. So with that said, it's a very fitting one that the starting of the tier list is with hyper aggro, because I think, as we kind of already alluded, that's more or less defined the initial like push of building decks for the set.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely forming a bunch of changes in text and stuff like that, where it's like, okay, I need to do what I'm doing, but also be aware that these decks go fast. You know?
In previous sets, and I would say pretty much every set up until this point, I mean, maybe Chapter 1 had a little bit, of hyper aggro, but it was never like, okay, if I'm not ready on turn 1, then it's probably okay. Maybe I get a little bit behind, but I'll have the tools to catch back up. This is one where it's like, okay, if you're not ready by turn 1 or 2, then you're just dead.
Yeah.
And so like everybody's at least conscious and aware. And so you have to be conscious and aware. The two big cards from hyper aggro, which is Amber Amethyst, is Daisy Duck and Amethyst Chromacon. Daisy Duck, the 4/1 Amber card that quests for 2, or 1/4. I said 4/1. Well, one strength, 4 willpower that quests for 2. It's really hard to remove that early on in the game, and so that gives a lot additional like questing power and helps you go wide, because it makes it more difficult for every card you play for your opponent to just like take out. And then on the the draw power side, you have the Amethyst Chromacon, which lets both, or I guess every player, if you're playing a multiplayer game, draw 1 card. Which at first, again, my very noobish brain that said, well, that's terrible. You don't want to be giving your opponents cards. But in this context, I think we've said before, you don't really care, because you're literally just drawing every single card you can and playing it so that they have to answer every single turn. And the average cost of your characters / your cards you're playing is so much lower that you can usually play both of those characters that you draw 1 for turn and then draw 1 for Chromacon, and chances are you're going to be able to play them both that turn, whereas your opponent's most likely only going to be able to play 1. And by the time they're able to play 2, they're probably already lost. And so those are the two big cards that like make this extremely viable. I will say, as Steel continues to be a thing in the game and very relevant to the meta, it continues to make it harder and harder for this to like have long legs. And so while I think it's very good, I think in a world where there is so much widespread removal and grab your swords, it's never going to be like the cream of the crop or the best deck ever. And so I think it's solid A is probably fair.
I think so.
Especially given the focus that every player needs to have for this to like come up. Like
it's somewhat meta defining.
I mean, I would say it is meta defining.
Yeah.
Just because it's not the best deck doesn't mean it doesn't help define the meta. In your like local set champs, I mean, we'll obviously cover that a little bit more in depth, like once we get closer to the time frame. I mean, we're still a month away from the first set champ coming out, but if you don't, it's very easy to kind of like gauge the meta in a local realm if you have the normal group of players that you're playing against locally. But at like a DLC, like we're talking about for Vegas or for Seattle, like there will be people there with that deck, and if you're not ready for it, you will lose those matches. And when you have to go 14 out of 18 to guarantee yourself a slot in the top cut, like you can't afford to not be ready and drop some games. So,
I mean, if you're not expecting this, then it's gonna beat the ever living what out of you.
It's gonna run, and by turn 5 you'll be done in 10 minutes, and you'll have a really long extended break to go really think about what just happened to you. Okay, so another newish one, I would say it's seen some play back in the day from time to time, but has never really had any legs.
It's
but
got legs
it definitely
now.
does now. Would be Blurple or Blue Purple or Sapphire Amethyst to go by the actual colors or ink combinations. The big tools that this was given this time to really give it legs is Cogsworth, the 1 cost, 1 stat line, quest for 1 gives any other card rush. And the new Elsa Fifth Spirit, the 5 cost inkable, 2/5 stat line, quest for 1 is evasive and has the ability to exert something when played and has rush. So if it has an ability, Elsa, they just gave it to Elsa. Like basically it just does it all.
Yep.
So that really allows, that deck to deal with wide boards. That ink combination does not have the ability historically to deal with wide boards. There's no Be Prepared, there's no Grab Your Swords, there's no Tinkerbell, there's no widespread dealing of multiple characters on the same turn, but the ability of Elsa and Cogs to, rush something in and take something out before they're able to quest with it, like that enables, a little bit more flexibility in dealing with that wide board.
Sure.
And so from that respect, that's kind of what has made this, take that leap up into like the next tier higher and give it a lot of viability. Elsa, Spirit of Winter, the Chapter 1 legendary that was just running absolutely rampant in Chapter 1, has seen a massive resurgence as well.
Yeah.
And so that's also a really big, important tool to think of because, again, like if we're talking about, exerting characters and freezing them and giving yourself more time or dealing with more of your opponent's board pressure, she was like the initial goat of that.
I mean, now it's really beneficial. Like she can just give you that, turn or two that you need to win the game.
Yeah. Elsa, exert the cards, something plus Cogsworth next turn, rush them in, attack the stuff that you just exerted, clear the board. Then you have, the bounce package with goats and castles and libraries, the new location in Amethyst to help, put that lore pressure on to close out the game. So I think this one's the real deal too. God, I can't remember his name. I'm going to feel terrible about it, but there was a 13-year-old that won one of the big side events in Toronto with Blurple.
Nice.
And it's just so cool to see that, right? Like that's somebody awesome. So young with such a high potential. It's like, okay,
it's great.
He's going places clearly. And so it's clearly, I mean, I would say this is A as well. I think that, again, I think.
Let's be playing this on the blue side of things. We talked about a lot about the purple.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. We should talk about that a little bit. So, Tipo, I forgot. Yeah, I mean, Tipo's another set 5 one. So, Tipo's the one, the 2-turn where you can, take one of your hands out and ink it. So, basically, like a one-time Fishbone Quill. Which, again, if you're talking about, rabbits and other draw power like Flaversham, I actually don't think a lot of these Blurple decks run Flaversham, but if you're talking about,
I don't think they're item heavy.
No, they're not, and that's why I said that, or why I backtracked the Flaversham. Don't play Flaversham and Blurple. But then you've got Mickey as well from that side, which, obviously takes another card off the top of your deck and puts it in your inkwell. So it's a lot of ramp tools like that. You can obviously bounce those to do it again if you needed to continue ramping. And then Hades is another big one, to just basically, unconditional removal unless it has a ward on it. To just put something else, from your opponents into the inkwell. Those are the big ones. I have a Blurple deck, but those are obviously like the most important pieces because again, with those two things, you're trying to ramp and then get into big bodies like Elsa fast so that you can take control of the board.
So is Fishbone played in this or not necessarily?
I'm pulling it back up real quick. Fishbone is played.
Okay.
And it's just another one of those. Actually, I take it back. Fishbone is not played.
Okay.
In my list, it's very, very, very Amethyst heavy. I have 2 Let It Goes, 3 Mufasas, 2 Hades, Mickey, and Tipo. That's we already talked about. Wow. And then, so for like draw power, you've got Friends on the Other Side. You've got Rabbit and plus Bounce, which you've got a ton of bounce package stuff in there, obviously. And then you've got the Library and Queen's Castle to draw off of as well.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how you're getting all your draw power, and, you're just kind of doing your own thing, ramping into your big bodies like Hades and Elsa and Ursula, which I think is kind of an important piece these days because of all of the Steel Song, which we'll get into in a little bit. But, yeah, I think Blurple's the real deal. I think it has a lot of potential, and, again, knowing what it's good against, which any damage-based removal decks, I think it's really, really strong because, you're getting into those bigger bodies so fast that you are going to be able to like live through a lot of the damage-based removal.
A deck like this can only get better, I think. I mean,
Yeah, for sure. And then another fun piece is the Bell Accomplished Mystic, which moves
Nice.
damage when it's played. Has the great mat from this set. And so if they're like chipping away at you, you just play Bell, move that damage to them, and take your opponent out. And so I think it's a solid A tier.
I think so too. I think, yeah.
Okay, moving on to Repeat, which
All right.
you didn't pick up on that pun.
I mean, I did. I picked up on the pun itself. I'm like, okay. Oh, and then I got it.
Yeah, but it's just funny. So it's like RE-PETE, not like the word repeat. Like I want to play that song on repeat. But it's called Repeat because it's Pete Bounce. I think when we started off and we've talked about Pete in the tier lists and the importance of the card, like when it was announced, God, probably 10 episodes ago at this point.
Yeah.
But the ability to stop your opponent from playing, actions, especially in a world where Steel Song, Sing a Resurgence, obviously be prepared, grab your swords, and a lot of other
Under the Sea.
I was about to say we saw a big surge of Under the Sea decks at the end of last set, and that's continuing now. So there's a ton of action based removal / shenanigans that can go on, and Pete just stops all that. And so the ability to kind of put your opponent on pause for a turn with Pete's ability is really big, and the ability to bounce him and replay him turn after turn potentially can really stall your opponent out if their win condition is really hingent on the ability to use those actions.
Sure.
So this is a little aggro-y. This is it has a lot of the more aggro tools like your Maleficent's. I think it's Biding Her Time, the 1-cost Quest for 2. You've got your Smee, your Captain Hooks, and all of the things that go along with like a normal Amethyst Steel game plan. And so there's nothing like groundbreakingly new in this one that we've seen some of these in the past. Kind of get some sort of semblance going. I mean, you obviously have Queen's Castle for a lot of lore pressure, and some of the bigger bodies in Steel and Amethyst, like your Tinkerbells, and depending on your brew of how you're going, you've got your Ursulas and your Elsas there as well. And so you have a lot of great tools. I think it's a little in that mid-rangey game plan, and so I think it's good, but I think it's kind of one-dimensional. Whereas if you're like really relying on that Pete to continue to just like put a stop to your opponent, it's like, what if you don't find him? We've seen that a lot with other decks too, where it's like, what if you don't find the key driver to what's going on? I think this is good. I don't, if I'm like, again, putting in a tier list like we're doing, I don't think I'd put it A. I'd probably put it B tier.
Yeah.
Just because I think you're going to have more success into more matchups with some of these other decks.
I mean, not every deck is song heavy. A lot of the meta is, but not every deck is song heavy. So
yeah, well, that's a good point too. I mean, I think most of them are, but there are cards
the
like
2 and 8s here aren't.
No, well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, and like the Sisu. I mean, Sisu is like the one card that it continues to be that like, okay, if it was just Be Prepared, then it would probably die off because there are so many tools that are, characters on playabilities now. But with Sisu, yeah, I mean, that really changes that deck types, which we'll get into that one as well. But yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, not every meta deck is, action heavy. And if it's not, you've still got tools to deal with it. But it does really shift the game plan that you're going into because Pete's such an integral part of that one. Okay. Moving on to one of your lost.
This one hurts. It does hurt.
Well, I don't know if you're aware of how this one's coming along these days.
I think I am a little bit, but let's talk about it.
Green purple / emerald amethyst, the tempo bounce.
EA tempo.
You were an EA player and Stitch champs. I think this is like fully back.
Is it?
I think it's like fully back.
Man, I haven't seen it then.
That's what I was saying.
Okay.
I said I don't know if you've kept up with everything quite as much as I had, because I did a bunch of reading this week going into it. Artabax is like fully back on board, and if Artabax is fully back on board, like something's going good.
Good.
Right. I was watching his stream yesterday actually, and he was just giving it to all his opponents because he's obviously is very masterful at using those lines and figuring out the best way to play it. So.
I was actually going to say this before I saw what's on the front of the picture on the tier list, but is it based around the Ursa Legendary at all?
She's in some of the lists.
Okay.
Again, if we're talking about actions and singing songs, and especially in a world, again, I hate to keep referencing, potential S tier decks, but Steel Songs is like, back in full force these days. And so having a tool that, can stop singing,
Yeah.
like that's a big deal. And so, yeah, I think it's fully back. So it's a lot of the old stuff. But there are the Clarabelles. We talked about
Sure.
Clarabelle already. And then there's Mother Gothel.
So it's a little higher cost now.
Yeah, it's definitely
Okay.
it's definitely a little more mid-rangey than
Nice.
aggro.
Okay.
But there's so many new tools in Amethyst in Amethyst and Amber. God, I said Amber, and because we were just talking about hyper aggro and Emerald and Amethyst that really give it a little bit more length to it. So Clarabelle is obviously one of the big draw powers. You've always got Diablo if you want to go that route. Back in the chapter 3 days of its heyday, there was no Diablo. Now we're back into the Diablo realm, and so you've got draw off of Diablo if you want to. Talked about Clarabelle. I've seen a ton of lists for this one, and so there's I don't think it's like fully fleshed out yet, I guess is the best way to put it. There's a lot of different like ways you can take it. I've seen the new Ana played a little bit, which is one of my honestly favorite cards of the set, even though I'm not an even Emerald player. The one that's 3 costs uninkable, 2/3 stat line, quest for 2, that gives you, the choice of paying 2 ink to make your opponent discard a card, give a character +2 strength, or banish a damaged character. I think that's just really flexible. So that's a big one. I'll also say I should say this too, that there were 2 Emerald Amethyst decks that like made massively deep runs into Toronto. And so like in a post Bucky world, this was already starting to like show some glimmers of hope.
Yeah.
And then you add some new tools like the new Mother Gothel that allows you to basically the Lady Tremaine of bounce, is whenever you play this character, opponent chooses one of their characters to return to their hand. So that's a piece that's obviously being played a lot. You're welcome. The song that says shuffle chosen character, item, or location into their player's decks, and then that player draws 2 cards. I think that was one of the downsides last time, is that it, Emerald and Amethyst. Well, no, Amethyst has the bounce package, so it could deal with locations in a little bit of way, but those 2 didn't really have any way to deal with items. So, getting into like a more of a late game, mid range game plan with your dimes and other impactful items like that, just, it couldn't deal with it. And so it either had to go and do its thing or lose. And now you have a little bit more of abilities to deal with that. And then I'll throw one out you here that I have seen quite a bit of that I did not really see being a thing. But we have the new item from Emerald, the Emerald Chromicon.
Oh, okay.
So
nice.
3 costs uninkable, but it says during opponent's turn. So not during your turn, only when opponents are the ones that are initiating the banishing. Whenever one of your characters is banished, you may return chosen character to their player's hands. So again, that allows you a little bit more draw, allows you to put board pressure on, because your foxes, your rabbits, your goats, like all that stuff that you're trying to get rid of, if you got a Chromicon on there and you're bouncing a goat, like your opponent's the one choosing to like, you can't attack it. Like if you don't have any way to deal with this. So I see this being honestly one of those cards where if this starts to, really, really creep up into the meta, that it could really shift what people are playing, because if you can't deal with this, then you can't challenge. If you can't take this off the board, then every time you challenge something, then you're just putting those cards back into your hand. And again, if it's a goat or a rabbit or a fox or something that has a really strong on playability, then it puts you in a really poor place. And so you're basically just racing at that point.
I mean, there's a lot of nice combos. Like I was thinking about when you're talking about your welcome. I mean, you sing your welcome, you get rid of a board threat, they draw 2, you play Clarabelle, you get those 2 cards plus some probably.
Yeah, I didn't even talk about the Clarabelles. So I mean, not only the big Clarabelle that we talked about in the card of the week, but the shift targets. There's the 1 cost that says when you play this character, you may pay 2 ink to banish chosen item. So again, we've got ways for Emerald to deal with items, which is really important, given the die meta and the massive amount of item ramp we had last set. And then there's also the 3 cost Clarabelle that's seeing not quite as much play, but it's still seeing a little bit, that says when you play this character, if your opponent has more cards in their hand than you may draw a card. And so there's a ton of those. The Gothel shift target as well is also being played. When you play this character, you may pay 3 ink to return chosen character to their player's hands. So again, there's a lot of bounce shenanigans, a lot of abilities to disrupt your opponent's board, just like the tempo plays of set 3. But there's a lot more tools now.
This is fun. I love it.
Yeah, I think this one's going to catch people off guard because it hasn't been played in a while. It's like familiar, but very different enough. Had I not been watching Artifacts play this, I'm pretty sure it was last night. I wouldn't have believed how good it was. I've seen lists and I've seen some theories and stuff going around, but like watching him, masterfully play that deck into his opponents, I was like, this is the real deal.
So that Merfolk and Flynn, are they in this?
There's definitely lists with Merfolk Flynn. Okay. Again, there are the more aggro-y sides. On those more aggro-y sides, you're not going to get all of the Clarabelles, all the Gothels, because again, it's trying to go a little bit faster than that. But there is the more mid-rangey builds with your, Ursula, Sea Witch Queens that stops the singing, your Clarabelles, your Gothels, your choice of kind of all of those, depending on which way you want to go, and being more of a mid-range tempo deck. So this is definitely A tier in my mind. I think this, is one of those that's very hard to deal with. That Chromacon, for instance, if you're not ready for that item, you really just go into a race at that point. You can't go banishing goats because they just go back to their player's hands so that they can then keep on the bounce shenanigans and getting the lure that way. I really, really like this one, and I really wish I had more Emerald cards to try to play this, because this is a really fun one in my eyes.
If this stays under the radar, it could be dangerous. Really dangerous.
This is in the same realm as the hyper aggro, especially on the Merfolk Flynn builds, because again, it's one of those really fast ones that if you're not ready for, could really catch you off guard and be over before there's anything that you can do to deal with it. So
yeah, I'm building this when we get home.
Yeah, it's a fun one. It's a fun one. And it's weird. I guess I should say this now. Like, I think there's going to be a ton of A tiers. I think, again, we talked about this. Like, the meta's still wide open, so it's not like we're just putting everything A tier, and that's kind of it. But yeah, there's a bunch of A tiers. So, Lemon Lime, moving on.
All right.
Lemon Lime / Under the Sea / Key to Board Wipe / Ward Shenanigans.
Yeah.
This one I think is still the real deal. Again, it won Toronto, so that proves that there's something there, and it did get a few more tools too. So think about your welcome. We just talked about that one. I've seen some with the new Ana. I just touched on that one too. I really like the new Ana. This is very much in the realm of board disruption, hand discard disruption with Prince John, so that you can draw the muses to bounce and disrupt your opponent's board. And kind of that slow burn of what we said from last set. They all had that kind of same tempo on, like, I'm going to build a bunch of threats on the board and do a bunch of shenanigans and then go for like this big Hail Mary home run under the sea that then, wipes out your side of the board and lets me kind of just quest out from there. So all of that's really the same. I think the biggest tools this time, as I've kind of already touched on, would be your welcome, your flavor of Ana / Gothel / Clarabelle. I think most of those are probably not super relevant into the deck, but they're still there. The vast majority of this stuff is going to be more on the discard side, and so your Prince Johns, your You Have Forgotten Me's, your Sudden Chills, your Ursulas, Bare Necessities, all that core is still very much there. Going into the the massive swing of playing Kita and then Sing Together Under the Sea to one-sided board wipe. So. Yeah, I think this is a very solid A tier as well. I think that nothing's really changed. I think if, anytime you can disrupt somebody's hand as strongly as you can with this deck, if you're not ready for it, then you just, it might be a slow burn at first, but then they hit that home run with Under the Sea on you, and it's like, all right, there's, I see it coming because they've got an Aerial and a Muses on board, and I'm just, kind of cooked. So,
I mean, we're not even halfway through yet, and you can see how fun this meta is.
It might be more wide open than set 3 at this point.
I mean, again, we haven't had necessarily a big forming yet of like what's.
No, I think after Vegas, everybody will, the quote meta chasers, which I don't mean that in a bad way, because I would 100% consider myself a meta chaser because, I want to be on the best cards. I feel like I'm not necessarily the best player. And so like putting myself into a situation where I have the best chance for success, which means playing a very strong meta deck, is very important. And so that's how the game goes. And so I think, to your point, once you have, a big event that, kind of pushes people into certain buckets, that it could change a little bit. But for now, yeah, all of these are super strong. I think we'll continue to see a bunch of it too. So.
It's fun. It's so fun.
But yeah, lemon lime. If you're an MDC player, don't be afraid. It's still as strong as it was last set, and it's all a success last set. So
Here in locals, we have a few lemon lime lifers, you know. That
shout out Cody. You scare me when you play lemon lime. I'll just say that now.
I hate him when he plays it. I despise him. But it's fun. It's so fun.
Yep.
I mean, it's the key discard deck now with Bucky gone.
For sure. And that was the initial discard color combo too.
Yeah.
Back in set 2. So okay, moving on to the next one. Would be the Red Dime, aka Sisu on Ice, aka Sisu Control, aka Sapphire Ruby Control.
I'd say it's definitely back to Sisu on Ice. For sure.
Oh, for sure. And the reasoning behind that is because it's very much it's very Sisu heavy, and there's a lot of ice blocks now.
Ice block is back in full force.
Yeah. So with again the shift, I would say, to the very faster meta, or much more quicker meta with your hyper aggro and your Emerald Amethyst decks that are getting out and questing a little bit quicker. You've got to have early board removal, and so Ice Block plus the Sisu Daring Visitor are kind of the combination that these Ruby Sapphire players have come up with, and so you can basically get anything early down to 1 strength or less, and then you use those Sisus you use them as removal. But then guess what? When you have a basic Sisu on board, you've also got a Sisu shift target, and so getting a Sisu out on 6 can be very disruptive. And so with that speed necessary, there's been a little bit of cutting back on the be prepared and pushing more towards the Sisu side,
which I think is huge.
Yeah, I mean, again, the meta's faster, and so you have to be on that front.
Well, so much of there's a lot of stuff in meta that's teched against songs. So if your removal is character based, you're pretty good shape.
Yeah, and exactly. We talked about Pete, and Pete doesn't disrupt your Sisu.
Ursa Receiver.
It disrupts your V-Prep.
Ursa Legendary. Like a lot of stuff is based around song, like prohibiting from removal.
And action. I mean, and using actions to your advantage. And so when you have a more character-heavy deck for your big swings, then you're in a better spot. And so I think this is back in S tier. This is one of those that's always been on the cusp of being really good. I've had some success with it. I will say I've played this a little bit this set, and I have just been absolutely decimated. I haven't figured out the play lines yet. And so me personally, I'm not back on this one, even though I probably should be, because it's, I think, one of the best decks currently. It has tools to deal with all of those other ones very handily. It can ramp, it's got a dungeon draw, and it's got board wipes with Sisu, and most of the cards in these other decks, I guess Blorple has a lot of abilities to deal with it, because it's got your foxes and your goats that have 4 strength, and then getting up fast into your Elsas that also have 4 strength and tapping stuff down. That might be the toughest one, but you still have, you do still have some be prepared in there to deal with decks like that. But yeah, I think it's got a lot more early tools, and so again, it's a little bit quicker too. And then the Sisu shifts not only one side board wipes, but also quest for 3. So
that's huge. I love it.
So yeah, I don't think there's a ton of stuff to need to say on this one. I think there's not a bunch more tools per se. I think this one's kind of always had the tools and has always been kind of like hovering around one of the best meta decks.
It's meta shaped.
I think the biggest tools that this one got this time would be the Cuscos. This is the first Sapphire deck we're talking, or I guess we talked about in Blurple, and maybe I should have mentioned Cusco and Blurple as well. But it's not in all of the lists. But the new Cusco, super rare, that lets you put an item or location into your opponent's discard or into your opponent's inkwell. Obviously deals with like the Queen's Castle, and deals with the library, and deals with your other opponent's dimes. Was probably the biggest weakness last set of this deck. And so now that you have pretty much an unconditional, like I can just get rid of that thing now, that you didn't have in this color combination before, is one of the biggest things that you can do now. And it's, again, that's, really telling to why I think this one has taken that step forward compared to where it was last time. But everything else is, Sisu, Be Prepared, Maui, Hiram, and all the items for all the draw power, and is very similar from that front. So,
I mean, I think it deserves that S tier. I think it does.
Yep, I as well. Okay, moving on to another maybe forgotten about one,
Yeah.
but still very relevant, I think, especially in our meta. We have a couple people playing it, is Mufasa.
So I think just before we get into it, like Mufasa as a whole, that card, it's so fun to experiment with.
It is.
I mean, it just character based decks, that little faster, little, and you can play bigger stuff that comes out early. Like it's just a fun deck to play around with.
And again, if we're talking about a meta where Pete potentially is one of the biggest like shapers of what's going on, let me tell you, Mufasa is not concerned with Pete.
And I mean, it's somewhat of a daisy counter. Like you're not drawing any non characters, so you know.
Yeah, it's definitely a daisy counter because I played in a win a box last weekend, weekend before last, and played 2 Mufasa players. And let me tell you, if you don't have a whole new world to then discard all those characters they're drawing, it's a not fun time.
Yeah.
It's a not fun time. I luckily beat it in the win a box, but this week at League I lost to that same player playing it. I just didn't have the tools, and you know they have a lot of bigger bodies with the damage removal characters like your Mulans and your Mother Gothels, and so if they're able to like get off the healing combos with Rapunzel and Julieta, then it's just really tough to deal with.
It is. I mean, it's a fun deck, and obviously we're talking about the Ruby.
Yeah,
and
Ruby.
Mufasa.
Yeah, I guess Mufasa, the legendary from set 2 that when you banish the character, you get to look at the top card of your deck. If it's a character, you get to play for free. I think this is good, but at its core, when it was at its best, it was one of the best aggro decks, and it was able to again like outvalue quest for a bunch, draw a decent amount, and then get to those big bodies, and then get value off of Mufasa. I think with the hyper aggro and some of these other like discard style decks like your lemon limes, and even your green purples are really can be on the more aggro side. I think it's good, but I still don't think it's like in prime time yet. So this one's probably B in my book.
Yeah.
Man, again, we're green on this. This is one of those which I guess is kind of good because we're 45 minutes in and we've still got quite a few decks to go through. So, so maybe it is a good thing we're agreeing on all these. But yeah, I think Mufasa is really fun if you're a Mufasa player, which I know there's a few people I interact with on social that are very diehard Mufasa fans. This is B in my book does not mean not viable. It just means you're a little bit more consistent with some of these others. Mufasa can
little niche.
Yeah, Mufasa can definitely win for sure.
Yep.
Okay, moving on to blue green.
Blast.
I know I wanted to spend some time on this one, but we're taking way too long, so I don't think we have as much time as I'd like to. But yeah, blue green Baja Blast is the fun online name that everybody's given it. We touched a lot. We did touch a lot on this with the Clarabelle stuff, so maybe we don't have to dig super deep into this one. But yeah, it's all packaged around Tipo, Fishbone, and Clarabelle / Hiram as the draw, with mainly Clarabelle being Tipo, dump your hand, shift on to Clarabelle on 5. You have no more cards left. Your opponent, if they're doing any drawing at all, they've probably got 3 or 4, and then you're drawing 3 or 4 cards, and then you're inking 2 more times, and maybe playing an action or another card, and so you're down to 1 again, and then you draw 4 more cards. Like, it can be insane if you can't deal with her. And as we talked about, the 5/6 body is really tough to deal with, and so I think it's one downside is that it doesn't have the removal aside from like Hades and Let It Go, and then obviously it's got some bouncing type stuff that you can do in Emerald with potential Mother Gothel or You're Welcome and some of those other cards. But if your opponent's able to go wide and you're not able to deal with all those things, then it kind of loses. So I would probably say this one's B tier as well. I think it's fun and it's viable, but I don't think it's not as consistent as you'll see. If you hit your ramp and you hit your Clarabelle, then you can have a lot of success. But if you don't do that, then it can be a little hit or miss.
I agree.
Okay, the old faithful Ruby Amethyst.
And how does this stick around?
It always does. Hold on, sorry. Let me for the people listening at home. I don't know what
wherever
TV
you're
or
at.
something. The people listening that don't see it. So we got Ruby Sapphire on S tier, Hyper Aggro, Blurple, Emerald Amethyst, and Lemon Lime Under the Sea all in A tier. Pete, Steel Amethyst, Mufasa, and Baja Blast Blue Green in B tier. That's where we're currently sitting.
Yeah.
And moving on to Ruby Amethyst, which just never dies.
Yep.
most of the lists that I've seen thus far haven't really added much set 4, if any at all.
Yeah.
But I think that's more a testament to like how strong the color combination is and the tools that they've had forever are. There's a lot of diehard Ruby Amethyst players that they kind of just like sit back and like wait for the meta to kind of settle, and then they just like use the tools that they have to build the best deck into that meta and are very good at it.
I mean, you have so many removal and draw options. You kind of just base it around whatever is being played.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the point. Is I think there's like I don't know if I've said this on the podcast before, but the way that I've kind of started to think about the game a little bit is there's like really three fronts of like resources. There's resources in your hand. So you obviously have like your hand to draw resources. You've got your like removal resources. And everything that goes along with that, so that that's another like front that you have to like be able to deal with, and then you've got your like board presence / lore resources, and you kind of want to be winning on all those fronts, and that color combo like does it all perfectly. It's just a matter of like how it needs to be tooled for everything else happening. So like currently, I would probably say this is B tier, but that's not. I don't think that's fair. I think it's definitely an A tier deck because it doesn't have any bad matchup. Like it can do everything. It can go quicker and deal with early threats pretty well with all of the bounce / rush characters it has. It's got the tools to be more of a mid-range / late game control deck with your Be Prepared and your Madame Medusas. So again, it's like the flexibility, which we've talked about on here a ton too, is always there. And so I think it will always be around and it will always be really good. And so I think putting it in B tier just because those diehards haven't like really started to socialize other lists yet isn't really fair to the in combo. So if you're a Ruby Amethyst truer, keep on trucking because you're definitely okay.
Sure.
Okay, one of my babies now.
It is your baby.
Moving on to Blue Steel, which actually I was pretty low on this the past couple weeks, but we're gonna play after this, and I'm back on Blue Steel.
All right, let's do it.
So
dude. Let's do it.
I think the reason being, is it has very strong ward characters. Again, we talked about this earlier with some of the Mufasa talk on the community questions / comments. Is Aerial Treasure Collector, Cogsworth are like incredibly powerful cards, and you can't deal with them very well because they both have ward. And so, yeah, that's what kind of my Blue Steel list is kind of shaping its way around. I'm just a little curious / concerned on how it deals with some of the more aggro-y stuff. But I think it deals. I'm not going to give it S tier. I don't think it deserves that necessarily. But I think it has tools again to deal with all of these. It has the removal. It has the ramp into big bodies. It has the late game closing with the dime. I think everything that you could possibly want is there. I think the Tipo adds a bunch because it's inkable ramp, which has been missing. Last set there was a ton of kind of concourse going back and forth between One Jump and the Mickey detective from set 1. Both of those uninkable. Both of those cut now.
Yeah.
You got Tipo, which is inkable. You got Fishbone, which is inkable. So that gives you a lot more flexibility into the uninkable cards of your deck and the ability, and the power that comes with some of those cards. So I think this is a solid A tier as well. And I even think it deals really well into both of the, or not both, but into like all of these decks around it, strictly because of that ward. It's so pesky to deal with.
Yeah,
so.
I agree. I mean, I think
I'm even going like above Blurple.
We haven't been ranking any of these within the tiers. Now you're
okay. Let's do that real fast. I think Ruby Amethyst actually is probably in the lower side of this.
Yep.
I'm gonna move Blurple down a little bit. I'm gonna go Lemon Lime a little higher. Okay, so now in A tier we've got Hyper Aggro. I don't even know if this should be this high. I think this Hyper Aggro probably goes.
Oh wow.
Maybe like that. So Lemon Lime being the highest A tier. Emerald Amethyst being the second highest A tier, Blue Steel, Sapphire Steel, middle of the A tier, and then Hyper Aggro, Blurple, and Ruby Amethyst ending out the A tier.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, I think it's just super consistent. I think all the tools are there. I think you got the ramp, you got the draw, you've got the disruption, you've got the new Cusco again for like an unconditional body plus location / item removal. So it's all there. Yeah.
I mean, it does exactly what it needs to do to get to the end game, and I mean the end game there is pretty.
Tinkerbell, I didn't even talk about Tinkerbell, which is maybe the longest running staple of any deck / card that's been around. So I'm going to continue to be a truer. I guess I didn't say that. I don't know if I've said this at any point. I've been very much on the Steel Song train up until this point. But I don't want to like put all my eggs in one basket, I guess, as we're testing and like trying to figure out things for the DLCs and the set champs. And so I'm going to jump back onto the blue steel train for the next couple weeks to see how things feel and how I can test it out there. So yeah, blue steel. Going on to another steel, green steel, which Jake's brother is doing the Daniel Bryan yes chant over there, because that's what he's been playing these days. So this is obviously a massive overhaul because of the Bucky errata.
Yep.
There has been some success. There has been some early success. Some of the side events at the DLC in Toronto had a lot of success. Some of the prominent players like Ed that won in Fort Worth has done some experiment with this and had success. And so I think there's a few different routes you can take.
Yes.
One of them being the kind of damaged base lore gain / disruption with your chief bogos that deal 1 damage when you play a Floodborn. So it's gone from like the discarding on Floodborns to the damage on Floodborns.
Yep.
And like I said, your brother's been playing this, and you would think as a blue steel player with Cogsworth that you're kind of just immune to losing to that deck. But he's beat me pretty significantly. And so it's, I think that's probably more a testament to me just being a bad blue steel player, to be fair. But he's obviously like made me think about that deck. And I think, there have been some sparkles here and there of it being really good. It's definitely not like S tier like it used to be. Is it A or B though? I honestly, like, I'm not sure.
He's sitting behind me, so I have to be careful with what I say here.
Well, then you say it and I'll confirm it, and then he can fight both of us.
The highest of B tier.
I think you're right. I think
he's nodding his head. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's probably B. I think there's potential. I just don't think there's been enough really like focus behind it to like really push the testing forward on it yet.
That's the problem.
What I will say is, like, if this came off and placed top 4 in Vegas, it would not shock me. I'll say that much.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's Emerald and Steel. You can't really go wrong with either of those inks.
Yeah, I mean the core package is still there. You've got
it just needs to be formed.
Yeah,
like there's 3 different ways you can go with this. Like we just need to figure out a focus on this and where it's really headed. Because like there's so many different versions of this right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has, again, I think this has the potential to be as good as an S tier. I just don't think it's quite there yet. But yeah, it's a very interesting one, and one that I was really kind of intrigued with from the beginning because of all the Robin Hood cards that came out and all of the new Robin Hood package with the Sherwood Forest, which isn't really seeing any play, but you are still seeing a ton of the damage-based stuff. So yeah, I think it's super interesting. Okay.
Do you want to switch our final 2 real quick?
Sure, why not? Okay, we'll start with the Jafar wheel being the next one to talk about. This is kind of like, I would say, the biggest wild card of them all. This, because like we talked about back in the day with Jafar, like this is the one thing that you can very clearly see coming, and if you can't do anything about it, then you just lose. Yeah. Like it's not like a play that you just like get caught off guard from. It's like, I see what's about to happen to me, and there's nothing I can do, and my opponent's about to get 10 lore.
It's insane. I mean, it has, like you're saying, it's very obvious. It's day and night. You can see what they're doing. Yep. Because obviously it's based around the Jafar.
The Jafar, every time you draw a card, get a lore.
Striking Illusionist. Yeah. And Whole New World package.
Throw in Amethyst Chromicon. That just is another it's not even an ink, or it's not an ink cost to activate. So every turn, if you don't remove Jafar, they're getting at least 2 lore from him questing and drawing a card off of Amethyst Chromicon.
And I mean, I believe he has a 4 strength, so he's right in the middle of that.
Yep.
World's Greatest Criminal Mind Medusa range, so he's right in the middle there.
Yeah, I mean, Ice Block deals with that we didn't see in the last time that he was played because Ice Block wasn't around. I think, I think this is B tier. I don't think this is like not playable. I think you could really catch some people off guard. 4 or 5 stat line, as you just said, is one of those that's really pesky to deal with. Mm-hmm. There's no, aside from Zeus, which you like have to have. Most people aren't running 4 Zeuses, and most people are running 4 Jafars. And so it's like, if you run through your Zeuses and they've still got more Jafars left, it's like, all right, well, I got to just win fast then, I guess.
Yeah, if you're running this deck, you have 4 Striking Illusionists.
So I think there's a lot of potential here. Again, I think there's another new Jafar that we've hyped up a lot, and the new Steel Jafar and Steel. So it's just like another potential shift target that has other, a lot of abilities behind it that can, add some kind of flavor to the game. So I think it has some legs, but again, I think this is one that's like just doesn't have a lot of focus right now, and so it's not going to see it. I don't think you're going to go up into any set champs with this and go against Jafar Wheel in 4 or 5 rounds by any means, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the last deck. Man, we did roll through this finally towards the end, which I feel good about. So,
yeah,
but last one, this is a big one. Steel Song.
So let's just.
I mean, it's the
game, right?
It's the other S tier right now. I personally like. I don't think it's the end all be all, and I'm not saying it's not the best deck.
Let's talk about the pros first. Like, well, we can talk about that in a little bit, but like,
okay, I guess if we're saying it's the best deck, then yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Naveen is insane. Naveen might be the biggest guaranteed value you can get, out of a card. Meaning, you play Naveen, you get to play a song for free, and then you have a lot of other things happen. So like an old Steel Song, kind of like the curves, it would be Ariel on 3. Utilize Ariel to sing something on 4, whether that be Grab Your Swords, whether that be A Whole New World, any of those other like big type of songs that Steel Songs utilizes. Now you can sing with Ariel on turn 4 and Naveen to do your Whole New World to then refresh your hand. So you've got a bunch of singers that can go up. You've also got the ability to go pretty quick with the daisies. Again, if you're on the kind of more aggro train, then you can go Daisy Piglet, Smee as early game options to really get off to the races to run into a fast lore race. And with those singers, you're going to have bigger bodies and better removal than your opponent who might be trying to race you. And so it's a lot faster, I think. When I played this in the set champs for Stitch back in Inklands, it had a ton of shift lines. It had your Queen shift line, your Cinderella shift line, your Robin Hood shift line. I think a lot. I mean, there are definitely versions out there that still have Robin Hood and Queen, and those are obviously still big pieces of it. But I think it's a lot more low to ground now. I think you're definitely trying to go the realm of Daisy, Piglet, Smee, Ariel, sing A Whole New World, get all those things questing, and put a bunch of pressure on there early. And then you've obviously got Pete to stop the Be Prepared and the Grab Your Swords that are going to remove all those pesky little characters that you've been dumping on the board. And so, part of me, I won the one-box tournament that we had locally a couple weekends ago with this deck. And so it's obviously good. I'm not saying it's not, but my downsides is that it's a lot more uninkable now. Used to be all your characters were inkable, and so you could dump all those uninkable slots onto the removal side. So you Grab Your Swords, your Zeus's, your Strength of Raging Fire is inkable, but your Let's Storm Rage-Ons and some of those other songs. Now that you're throwing some Naveens and Daisies into the mix, you have to pull back on some of that. So I think it's sped up a ton. And so I'm just not quite in the rhythm on how that should run all the time against all of the different decks yet. But it's very, very, very good.
I mean, it's the removal's so strong. It's consistent in removal. Like it's by turn 3, it's probably removing something every turn. I mean, and while playing characters.
Yeah, it definitely should. Again, I think that's back to your opponent and my kind of like reshaping of what the deck should be, because we initially had the conversations around this deck really early on. We were saying like Cinderella turn 1, Ursula turn 2, Ariel turn 3, so that you've always got a singer on board to sing something. But if you're playing a fast deck too, I don't know if you can do that every time, because if you don't hit your songs or the songs that you need, then you could be in a little bit of trouble, or put yourself in a little bit of a trouble in the spot. And so I think your Daisy, Piglet, Ariel lines are just as important. And so like knowing when to go which route is probably the most important thing, which is why I've been struggling with it a little bit this week. It's insane. It's nutty.
I mean, it's just like the characters. I think the big thing that gets overlooked is most of the characters you're playing like turn 4 and after are really well statted as well. Like really well, like just like even a Pete, for example, like is a 3/3. It has a really good on playability.
Yeah.
But it's a good body. Same with Naveen. It's a 2 lore 3/3. Like,
I mean 2 lore again. This a lot of the other singers that you have, or Ariel's 1 lore, Ursula's one lore, Cinderella's one lore. So you're setting up a lot of board pressure, but you're not setting up a lot of lore pressure. And so having another singer that is as powerful as Naveen that does quest for 2 is, I think, important. I mean it's insane. I think there's a lot of like clashing between the 2 top decks because the Sisu deck like very strongly counters Steel Song. So like if those are the 2 that like rise to the top, then like what does Steel Song do to beat that? And I think it just goes faster. And so again, it's like dump characters onto the board versus questing characters on the board versus dumping singers onto the board. And then just keep questing away.
And that's the thing. If those 2 decks are the ones that battle each other and attack against each other, then all those decks can be an A tier. Hallelujah, they get their spot.
Yeah, agree. And so those are, I think, by far and away the 2 top performers currently. Again, how this ends up being, and I think the micro adjustments within each of these is very different. I've seen a ton of different control deck, Ruby Sapphire decks out there. I've already tweaked my Steel Song deck maybe 10 times since we started, and I've seen just as many, if not more, other variations out there as well. And so I think that's going to continue to evolve over the next couple of weeks. And then once we get out of Vegas and we have another time to like revisit this topic, then we'll be a little bit more set in stone on what's looking good, what's not. Because to your earlier point, I think a lot more people are going to chase into each of these different buckets that do really well after you get back from Vegas. So
I mean, at the moment, it's healthy, dude.
It's insane. It's insane. As fun as it is, it's also really it's so frustrating. It's stressful is a better word to use, because if you're trying to do good, again, you have to like do your local meta research. It's like, okay, what's everybody playing? What's everybody playing the last couple of weeks at locals? Do we think somebody's going to bring something crazy? Like, you have to kind of. To be a good player, you have to really read the room as well. I mean, I don't think we've ever said that, but in order to be a top player, I genuinely think that you have to read the room and understand what everybody else is going to bring. Because if you're bringing Steel Song into a completely controlled meta, you're probably not having a good time.
I mean, it just like you could go to a local tournament and be getting ready for the Ruby Amethyst, the blue steels, the controls of Steel Songs, and then Tyler over here brings his Emerald Steel and.
Yeah, it's very possible. Yeah, I mean, again, it's very possible. So it's very exciting, but again, it's really stressful from the sense of like trying to find a good deck into what you think the matchups is going to be is kind of rough. But so quick recap: we've got Steel Song and Ruby Sapphire Control in S tier. In A tier, we've got Lemon Lime of the Sea, we've got Emerald Amethyst, Bounce Tempo, we've got Sapphire Steel. Resist removal, I guess. I don't know if that's what you want to call it. We've got Hyper Aggro, the Amber Amethyst. We've got Sapphire Amethyst ramp control, and then we've got Ruby Amethyst, the tried and true. In B tier, we've got Emerald Steel. We've got Amethyst Steel, Mufasa, Sapphire Emerald, and to round it out, we've got Emerald Steel Jafar.
Oh, is it?
Or Emerald. No, God, I said it. See, I went through all of that and did it perfectly until I got to the last one. Amethyst, Steel, Jafar.
I mean, just to go back to our thing real quick, like the complaint about it being a little stressful is a really good complaint to have. Like the complaint of it being stressful because there's so many options. That's a really good complaint to have. If that's the main complaint of the meta.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair.
Just overall very positive.
Yeah, it's going to be a fantastic time. Again, as I continue testing, getting into Vegas, I'm sure I'll have more thoughts. But as of now, it's wide open. And if you're a very niche player, don't want to play like the uber meta decks, like you should be having a really great time right now because you can find your flavor of deck to play and it have and find success with it. So fun meta, a lot of opportunities, and we'll continue to update as this evolves. But I think that kind of wraps it up, right?
I think it does.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time.
Bye, guys.